My name's Caroline Glark, and for the last 8 years I've been working as a humanitarian aid worker, traveling around the world to emergency hotspots. I began writing my book, No Dead Bodies After 3:30, in 2010. It was after I'd been deployed to Haiti after the worst earthquake that the country had faced, in which more than 230,000 people were killed. I arrived in Haiti just a few days after the earthquake, and I saw a devastated city. Buildings had been brought down, people had been killed, and many people were walking around completely dazed, some of them still ash on their faces and their clothing. The first place I arrived at was a hotel where the international search and rescue operation had been underway, and firefighters, including this one from France, were clearly exhausted after nights and days of trying to pull bodies and rescue people from the collapsed buildings. I was working at the time for the international aid agency Oxfam, which is a specialist in water and sanitation. One of my colleagues had been working at Port-au-Prince's main hospital. Many of the patients were refusing to go indoors into the wards and had to be treated outside. They were so scared of the aftershocks. My colleague had been telling me that she'd worked in the morgue because after the earthquake, all of the water supplies in the hospitals had been broken. The doctors and nurses had no water to wash their hands, clean their uniforms, or even clean the floor. I was intrigued. She had told me that bodies had been piled up in the morgue and the scene was terrible. A few days later, I went to the morgue. When I got to the morgue, there was a sign on the door. It informed people that the opening hours were between 8 and 3. It said that no dead bodies should be brought to the morgue after 3:30. I thought this was an incredibly symbolic sign, and I decided to use it as a title for my book. In the midst of chaos all around me, here was an attempt to create some kind of order, some regulation, when everything else around me was in some kind of chaos. Haiti was damaged in so many ways, and this deployment was one of the hardest that I had to go through. Not only was there physical devastation all around me, but it was very difficult to have communications between different agencies. Many of the key people had been killed in the earthquake. The phone networks were down. The airport was very badly damaged, so it was very hard to bring in supplies by plane, and many agencies had to truck them across from the neighboring Dominican Republic. I started writing the book when I first left the country. It was an attempt to kind of create some understanding, some meaning into what I had witnessed in the couple of weeks before, almost a cathartic experience. And because of my job at the time, I was like an emergency firefighting humanitarian press officer. I traveled the world with Oxfam. I went to many different countries. So this book was an attempt, a kind of snapshot from some of the countries that I visited. Haiti, though, is at the forefront of the book. It opens and it closes the book because I went back to Haiti 2 years later. I was really curious to see what had changed inside the country, whether the aid that agencies had given at the beginning actually had impact. I was very happy to discover that people were very grateful for the help that they had and that their lives had improved in some ways. Haiti was the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, so even before the earthquake, life for people was very difficult. I met this lady, Marguerite, a couple of days after the earthquake. She'd given birth to a little girl 2 days after the quake, right in the open air, surrounded by hundreds of people without any hospital treatment. 2 years later, I went back to her neighborhood and found her. Her baby girl was now a mischievous toddler, and her oldest daughter was going back to school. The family had moved into a new house, and her husband had managed to get a job. They were very grateful for the help that they'd received. In the community, I could see other improvements. Schools had reopened, businesses had restarted. Many people had even got help from Oxfam to start small businesses and shops.